We have a partner we do a lot of work for their clients for, and we were called in recently, or about a year ago, I guess, and there was a problem with SQL Server. It's a pretty large worldwide IT focused e-commerce site. And the client, we thought, was too frugal. And I'm sure nobody's had that problem before, but over time, we just kind of put a little Band-Aid here and there to keep things going. And finally, we gathered enough information to find out that that really wasn't the problem at all. That the real problem was communication. That this had been a long-term, there was a development company, an infrastructure company, the client, and now us. And so the real problem was the client had plenty of money, plenty of budget, plenty of focus and interest, but over the years, it's a 3 or 4 year project, the people stopped talking about what they were doing together and started talking about what wasn't working. And took us just about a day or two, because we are not smarter than anybody else, but we were outside. We just ran a few tools to capture some data, did a simple report, and then our job was just to try to put the glue together to get these people back on track and keep the project moving forward. And I just thought I'd share that to start, because there seems to be some of that going around. So I do a lot of work with SharePoint and business intelligence and development, or as the new phrase is, big data. I don't know where that came from, but it's kind of cool, and I like it. And how many people here have used InfoPath? Whoa. Whoa. You are the only one. Why not? About 10 years ago, Microsoft came out with this tool called InfoPath. Pardon? Yes. Well, doesn't matter. They bought Nokia or Nokia too. So it's an XML-based forms generation tool. And it was kind of an orphan for a while. It kind of languished in some of the upper builds of Office. But going back a few revs in SharePoint, they built an interface into SharePoint that really gave it a home. And so you can take InfoPath and you can do really rich forms, and you can embed code. You can publish that code up to SharePoint, and you can run it anywhere on the planet inside of a browser. There are some limitations. I'll try to share a few of those with you. But it really helps put together rich applications that can be run in a browser, and now that we're officially in the age of mobility, it's kind of a tool that has not really gotten enough attention, I think. So I just thought I'd share a few things with you. And let me run over a slide or two, and then we'll talk about it. Underneath of it, it's standards-based. So everything you see that I'm going to show you here generates an XML series of structures that get exported and imported by SharePoint, gets rendered. There's a preprocessor in there that will actually convert that, so it'll all run natively in a browser, including C# code if you need it. I'll show you some of that. I don't assume everybody's probably heard about, in about 4 weeks, Windows Server 2012 R2 is going to be officially shipping. And this might help Microsoft get Azure selling pretty well, because one of the big things, at least for a lot of people that I work with, is the ability to fail over to the cloud. There's an add-in you're going to have to get if you want to do that. But to be able to back up and fail over to the cloud is pretty cool. So this is kind of the buzzwords from Microsoft about what they think InfoPath really does. So if you have, we have a couple things I'll show you here. We have a large construction company who's been a client for a long time. And over the years, most of their jobs are not within 50 miles of the office. They're spread out over the southeast, mostly in the Carolinas and Georgia. And they will take a staff person, some key people, put it on the job site, and then they'll fill in with the rest. So you can't really run a business today effectively without digital tools. So there's been a big problem with gathering data from people in the field and managing it centrally in the office. So we recently deployed an InfoPath solution for them to do that. And I'll show you that. And it allows them to have, I think they bought Samsung tablets. I'm not sure. They didn't get Surfaces because the Surface did not have 3G, 4G in them, which was their preference. But I'll show you a couple things. So I'm going to pop out of this and put these on here so I can see. And if this computer cooperates, we'll pop over here. So SharePoint 2013 running here. Just a simple list, simple library. And if I wanted to make a new app here, all we need to do is use this gear tool, add an app. And I'm going to pick this Forms Library tool here. And there's our new library. At this point, there's nothing in it. So I'm going to click the right button here. Now, one of the things that was a disappointment, up through 2010, Office 2010, InfoPath Designer 2010, there was something called Visual Studio Tools for Office. Probably many of you used that. Well, what was cool about it is that's a mini Visual Studio. So if you wanted to write some code and attach it to this form to do some things that a forms processor couldn't do, you could take that and build it in and bind it and publish it to SharePoint and all that executed server side. Well, in 2013, they removed it. So you have to do it in Visual Studio. It's the same development process, but it's a much heavier deployment. So if you're doing work like we do, a lot of remote work, it's kind of an issue in that how are you going to publish to somebody that's remote, behind the firewall and so forth, that doesn't have the tool set. So I'm going to create a new blank form. And just a couple simple little tools here. And let's put a little table in here. And let's say this is our, and let me just code it up. And one of the cool things about this is we don't have to have InfoPath Designer or any license implications except what we want to use for development. And the screen is so light I can hardly see it. There we go. Let me just line this up a little bit. I'll do something. I have something a little richer here to show you. I just want to show you the process here. And there's a bunch of pre-built controls that you can just drop on your form. So in this case here, I'm just going to put a text box in there. And here. And in here. And I'm going to rename these and set a couple properties. In a couple minutes, we'll have a solution running, hopefully. So nothing fancy, and let me just turn this off so it doesn't distract us too much here. So pretty simple form, so I'm just going to save this, and it's going to save it as a template. So it's going to save it as an XSN form. And I'll just put it over here in my downloads folder. And we'll call it CIT PG. Now you notice that when we made the form library, we didn't add anything to it other than the standard metadata that SharePoint attaches to it. It's like 5 fields. But I want to actually publish this to my SharePoint site. So I'm going to publish it to my server. I bet I spelled it wrong. Let me find the right name here. I'm on the wrong machine, and that's why it didn't work. This will work a little better here. I'm struggling a bit with this screen here. All right. Try it this way. I actually wrote that first form on my local PC instead of on this remote machine. So let me fix that. And we'll insert the same table. Type in the same text. And let me drop these text boxes into our columns here. You can also attach workflows to these. And let me change the name here. All right, I think this is a little better. Now, I can preview this form interactively while I'm working in design mode. Like so, nothing fancy. But let's say that we like it and we want to save it and publish it. So once I've saved my basic form, just a little practice that we use. I like keeping the published form separate from the design form. So let's see if this works a little better here. Oh, shoot. I'm going to publish administrator approved form. I'll show you what that means in a second. And where do I want to put this? I'm going to put it on my local drive. And I'm going to put it in the same folder, and I'm going to call this CITPG pub. Now, this screen here is called promotion. So we're sitting here, we're trying to lay out some data that somebody's going to use. We might want to use this one form in lots of different places. And I want to have data that gets attached to this form, but I haven't made it yet over in my list. But it lives here in this form, so I'm going to use this thing called a promotion tool. And I'm going to promote the fields by clicking on the Add button. And it's going to make a custom content type over in SharePoint. Like so. Okay, not too complicated. So now I'm going to bring up SharePoint Central Admin, back-end tool. So this is one of several services that's built into SharePoint. The same kind of technology can be used for external connections to data called business connectivity services, Excel services, Visio services, etc. I'm sure in the next release, everything they make will be a service. I think that's the goal they have anyhow. This take about a minute to come up here. Make sense? Questions? Yes, sir. Say that again. It's just a place for me to manage it. I could have put it in SharePoint. I could have put it on a thumb drive. The problem you have when you want to do work remote is, especially as you're starting to get more complex stuff, and I'll show you here in a sec, is then you have a lot of other things that you want to bring along with it. But it's just arbitrary. Anybody else? Hold it for 1 minute. Okay, so I made this form. And I'm going to come over here under this General Applications section. And I'm going to manage my form templates. And I'm going to upload a new form template. And I'm going to go browse to the one we just made. And I think we call that, what, CITG Pub, right? And there's a couple of settings here that we want to keep defaulted on. And I'll show you why in a minute. Now this goes through your form, and it will do some code perusal to see if there's any errors in the form. And in this case here, there weren't any. So now you'll see that it's installing my form. So I'm going to wait here for a minute, let it put it into the central repository. And at this point here, I can't consume it yet because I have to activate this to a site collection. Familiar with that term? No? Yes? Okay, well, what SharePoint is, it started out as an internal project at Microsoft in the mid-90s. And it was so successful running internal business units at Microsoft, they made a commercial product out of it in 2001. We're now in release 5 commercially with SharePoint 2013. So a site collection is exactly what it says. It's a collection of websites, template-driven, supports the entire .NET framework underneath. It has a wrapper for a lot of the methods if you want to write code. And there's all kinds of scripting tools that work with it. You can have n numbers of site collections because you might want to trim security permissions to keep your costs down. You might want to have enterprise level features for one group or one application, standard for another. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to activate this form that we just made to a site collection. And I can pick it. I'll make sure I get the right one here. There we go. And you'll see up here, the way this works architecturally is underneath the covers, you have a web application that runs in IIS. Inside of that web app, you can have multiple site collections that can run, and you can put them on different URLs and so forth, and it just gives you a lot of flexibility to segment work and control security. So you'll see that I have more than one here, so I'm going to change this, and I'm going to go to this default one here, hopefully. I want to use this one here. And this backslash or forward slash is the root directory of that. So now I've told it that I want to activate this form to that site collection. As you can tell, I'm used to working on a slightly bigger monitor. And I keep hunting for the buttons here. Let's see, did that work? I can't tell if that worked. Well, let's find out. So I'm going to go into this website. And you remember that we made a CITVG form library? So I'm going to go look at all the contents of the site that I'm currently in, and you see across the top here, these are all peer sites, and they can have sub-sites. So what I'm going to show you here in a minute, because this is pretty plebeian what we're doing right here, something kind of interesting you can do with this, that you can deploy this in lots and lots of places, and as you make changes, you republish the same process we just went through, and it replicates everywhere. And it actually works. So we made this guy right here. And so I'm going to go into the library functions for this. This knows all about Word, Excel, all those kinds of things for document management. If you want to learn more about SharePoint, we do seminars over at Microsoft pretty regularly. What's the date on the next one, Kate? Okay. And they're free. So I want to go into this advanced setting. And I want to turn on something called a content type. Now what a content type is, it's like an electronic bucket, and SharePoint's smart enough to know that as long as you follow some simple rules, whatever you put inside of that content type, it will execute. Gives you a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to come down here now that we activated that, and I'm going to add a content type, because that's what we just made by publishing that form. Hopefully it got activated. And there it is, right? So if I go back up here to my library, you'll see that I have options that I can put up here. By default, we had one type of document. We now have two. And there's our form. So pretty simple stuff, but this is what's kind of impressive. I could take that form. It might be a time-off request for a company. It could be an expense report or something heavy-duty. And we could use it in lots and lots of sites, and every time I make a change, all I have to do is republish it. So I still have my InfoPath Designer running. Just do something simple here. Whoops. And I'm just going to repeat that process. So I'm going to save my form back to where it was before. Going to overwrite. I'm going to republish. Same location. Remembers my settings. I'm going to go down here and upload my new updated form. Let's see, I think I already have it running. Yeah. I think I'm losing my connection here, Galen. So now all the stuff we did before, I don't need to do it again. I just need to re-upload my change. So I'm going to go over here, bring back my form. Now we had these default buttons set so that it knows to check it and to upgrade my form if it previously existed. It did. It's doing it right now. You know, it's checking that again. It'll check it for version numbers. Inside of InfoPath there's a version number. So it'll make sure that you're incrementing at least you're one higher than what's up there. It's not perfect, but it does a fair amount of work for you. Yep. But you can hack around it. All right, so there, it put the form up there. So now if I go back to my website, and we just added that one little word in there. And let's just do a refresh here. So I didn't even have to restart my page. So what do you think? Does that make sense? Questions on this? Yes, sir. Well, you can run it with something called InfoPath Filler, but it makes no financial sense to do it because you have to buy a version of that program, like Office Pro Plus comes with it or whatever. And so if you had, depending on the number of users you have, you can buy SharePoint 2 or 3 times if you got a lot of users, and you get a bunch of other stuff out of SharePoint. And you can also run this in the cloud. Office 365, you can do this. You know, you have to have an E enterprise level. I think they're $12 a month a user and on up. Somebody had another question? Yes, sir. Could be, yeah.
Where is the, when we're dealing with database, this is that, whatever, where does that happen?
Okay, so what happened here was when we promoted those fields, the list in the libraries that live inside of SharePoint, they're not really in SharePoint, they're in SQL. Every SharePoint install has to have a SQL with it, even the free one. So what it's doing is it's taking a wrapper. SharePoint is taking a wrapper and it's putting on the front of those SQL fields so that we can better understand it. I'll show you. It created a list. Yeah, but you don't want to talk to it. Because SharePoint's the most complex product Microsoft makes. And that's saying a lot. And there's a lot of stuff in those SQL databases. Well, let me just say it this way. Be sure you have professional support on speed dial if you go and start messing with those tables. Seriously. You don't need to do that. You can take, well, you're getting at 2 questions here. So the first question is, we can take InfoPath with SharePoint and do a lot of the routine tasks we have around any work environment. The second thing you're getting at is, what if I have a very robust, serious database behind the scenes? Then I would use another service called Business Connectivity Services that I can use a security trimming to talk to that database and bring it in, and it lives in SQL, but it looks like a SharePoint list. And I can trim that so that I can control who gets to do it and what they get to do with that data, and I can put it in forms like this. Yes, yes. OLADB is what it is, but yes. Another question? So what if you want to do something a little bit more robust with this? So the big buzzword now is no-code solutions. So simple. We generally do this application and one of our events from scratch in about 30 minutes. And, you know, in the real world, you wouldn't do that, but we just do it to make the point that this is a business expense report. You can talk to get information on the user. You can talk to web services. That's a repeating table down there where it has the expense date. So you can have n numbers of data entries. But now that presents a problem. Because when we come back into SharePoint with this kind of data, we can't, inside of a form or a scripting tool, we cannot bring back X number of rows of data because SharePoint doesn't know what that is. We can bring back the first row, or we can merge the data, but that's not very useful. So by adding a little code, see if this cooperates. We can do stuff like this. So this is a purchase order system. And that's code that went out, read a list. And what's interesting about this, and why this maybe makes some sense in certain applications, this is a template. So in this company, there's a bunch of these types of applications. They live inside of a site template. So every time they get a new job, they spin up a new site template, and there's a little button they click that sets that up that has code that runs behind. So out in the field, this runs in a browser. And we can do some interesting things with this. Let me just pick something here. There we go. So to do this in a ASP.NET app would take a lot more work. And so if I want to write a purchase order, I'm having a little technical difficulty here with this monitor. This will just write lines in here. I'm going to bring one up because this is kind of being a little slow. And let me go back and bring one up that's already been done. I think I'm losing the connectivity here. Yeah, there it is. So you would enter here, it does the math. This company has a really complex billing system where you have to remember on a large project what you billed last month. And it might be the same item that you bill on over a long period of time. And this little submit button down here writes all the code back to the right places, all the data. There it is. It's trying to do something. I think it's showing me, Galen, it's showing me with limited, there, okay. Well, I don't know if I'm getting a, all right. Let me ask the question, tell you what this does, and we'll ask the question. Okay. We've integrated here, not us, just good tools that we have. Report services lives inside of this form. So it runs separately on SQL, but we grab all the same reference data, and we can run reports from inside of that form. So what a lot of people think is happening with a lot of this stuff, and we're buying into that, the way we do these applications is changing. So instead of writing these big one-off apps like we used to, we now take a lot of pre-existing server-level components and we stitch them together. So we write a little glue code. Now that code at times is going to be a little bit more difficult, but there's less of it. And we're doing a better job for the customer because we're deploying server-level components that are hopefully more robust. Questions? You could. It depends on the load. Like this thing I talked about at the beginning. Because these two companies were kind of at each other, and they were both being defensive, it took us a day to capture some data with Performance Monitor, use a third-party tool, and point out, we don't have enough hardware here. Look at this thing's peaking routinely. So depending on your load, you can run all this. And SQL on this particular server, SQL SharePoint is running. And it's running virtually in Hyper-V. You can now get for 10K, you can get an extremely robust server from Dell or HP. For, if you got deeper pockets, for 50K, IBM makes one that you can put, I think that's got 8 sockets on it. And 10 hardcore cores on each socket. And I think Windows Server 2012 supports what? Standard supports 4 terabytes? Yeah, so you can do a lot in one environment. While we're waiting for the router, I learned a new word. You know what a yottabyte is? 1 second. So I'm running this in SharePoint now. I'm a user. My InfoPath application has been published previously for me, and I'm just consuming it like I would a Word document. And all that code lives in that library, and depending upon my permission, I'm just using it. So it takes the front end for people that do development work. You can spend as much time laying out something as you can doing writing some lower level stuff. Customers are very, very particular about how things look. This is a tool that speeds up that process, won't do everything, but it'll do a lot of things. And then you can tie together a workflow with this form, and you can publish it into a central location, so it makes management of all that a lot easier. It's a central repository for a lot of applications that we would use in any office. Answer that? Pardon? Yeah, but it would be, unless you had like 5 users, and if you had 5 users, you ought to do that in the cloud. It's cheaper in the cloud. So, because you're going to have to buy what's called InfoPath Filler, is the least expensive way to get it. So you get Designer, which is what we use to do that simple little form. And then you take Designer, then you got to send that form to these other people to use. It's like Word documents, only it's XML. But if you put it in SharePoint or you put it in Office 365, you don't have to do any of that. One person creates it, authors it, manages it. N number of people get to use it. You look, I don't think I answered that, did I?
Yeah, but I'm still, I mean, the beginning of the presentation you were telling a story about a company that wasn't communicating well. And I'm still trying to piece together how InfoPath and SharePoint solve the communication.
Has nothing to do with that story. I'm just right in the middle of that. And because we're a technical community here, I thought it was interesting that these are both competent companies. And because they're in a long-term, very serious relationship, the communications broke down. And really, they just needed somebody to say, play nice, right? I mean, because they both want the same thing. So I just wanted to share that because everybody's had that issue. We're back on InfoPath. Does that make sense? Anybody else? Are we ready back there? Love that confidence. Let's see, reconnecting attempt, 5 of 20. Let's see. That would be you. That would be you. Yeah, go ahead and let me work on this. And I'm just going to take a minute here so the next presenter can have some time. But this is what we were trying to do a minute ago. And just come down here and just use this to create the purchase order. And I'll just show you, just pretty simple. Like so. And that quick, we have a new PO. And this is what I wanted to show you about how you can integrate reporting services. So this is an existing purchase order. Now these checkmark fields here would have been a bit more difficult to do in conventional development. And that's attached inside of our InfoPath form. So the business value of this is pretty large for this customer and some others we've done. So here they have this really robust job management system that fits their problem, their need, because people can use it wherever they have connectivity. Because this all runs in a browser, including these SQL Service reports. So the data entry is running in an InfoPath form. Now we had to add some code to this, some C#, because that doesn't do some of that stuff with the scripting tool. But you can do it. You can write C# code that lives inside the form, publish it back, which is exactly what happened here. And one last thing, and then I'll take a question and quit, see if this works. I think we had the connectivity issue earlier. To answer your question of how I would use it, this is trivial. But here's a lookup to the users on my network. And this is a little bit of code here. So since in a call tracking system we might have the same people coming in, if we added a new one in here, it would add that to our list, a lookup list. And that's a little bit of C# code there. From the time we talked about it until that was deployed, it was about a day's worth of work. That has a workflow attached to it. So when that's saved, the person that was in that top box gets an email. Hey, you got a message from this person and there's a link. And the link, this has an external interface on it, this particular site. So as people are out and about. Of course, we don't have any phone messages anymore, but any questions? Yes, sir. They're getting friendlier, Microsoft and Google. They're not quite there yet. You know, like Google Earth doesn't run an IE, you know, little things like that. But Google will run this and Firefox will run this. Safari, I'm not a fan, honestly. Here's a problem you have with this technology with Safari. So on an iPad, there's a bug right now in SharePoint 2013, and they're aware of it. So when a string it's prepended onto your browser, and it identifies the browser type. So when SharePoint sees that's a mobile browser, I don't care what you do over here, it says, I'm sending back a mobile page. Right? Well, in Safari, you can't change the mode that the browser runs in from mobile to desktop. And if a user is getting a message or a web page, an email, and they want to click on the link, you can download a third-party browser like Atomic or Opera or whatever you like, but you can't make that default without doing some serious hack to the iPad. Everybody understand? Make that connection? You know, Chrome works really good. IE works really good. IE9 and up works really good. Firefox works really good. There are less and less issues as time goes on. Anybody else? Well, thank you for your time. I hope it helped you.